Greetings. My name is Tom Parkinson. I'm a pastor in the Western Pennsylvania Conference of the United Methodist Church, and I want to welcome you to Generosity in the Local Church, a 5-part video series in which we're talking about how you can connect your church even more closely to the generosity of God. Whether you are a pastor seeking to shepherd a local congregation, or you're a finance committee chairperson who's wrestling with the church budget, or maybe a lay member of your church who wants to grow in your own generosity, this series is for you. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a fair amount of uncertainty and disruptions, such that lots of local churches are facing real financial stresses. The inability to gather together and pass the offering plate, combined with church members who have lost income and capacity to give, have created financial uncertainties for churches. And as local churches are gathering to make budget plans for 2021, many churches are wondering, what can we do to increase giving in our local church? Well, there are many strategies that churches have tried. Some churches do really creative fundraisers. Others make direct appeals from the pulpit. Some buy stewardship campaign materials. And all of these strategies, they can work, and sometimes they can work quickly, as people respond to the appeals and they give generously. But the truth is, if your church is going to experience long-term financial sustainability, it's going to require more than an appeal, a fundraiser, or a campaign. Those events can be successful, but as soon as they're over, you're going to have to do another one, or the church will wind up right back in a place of financial stress and uncertainty. In addition to those strategies that people can respond to today, I believe that every church needs to be very intentional about cultivating generosity among its members. Generosity is not a program. It is not a strategy. Rather, generosity is a condition of the heart. Generous people are those whose hearts have been opened by God to be receptive to the ways in which they can take what they've been given and use it to God's glory. Generosity is a posture of the heart in which people are ready at any moment's notice to respond to need. And every church needs to have generous people in its congregation, because generous people make generous churches. Now, to be clear, having generous people in your church is not going to be a quick fix to your financial problems. It takes time to cultivate generosity. Just as you can't cultivate the virtues of patience or compassion overnight, so also generosity will take time, intentionality, and practice. But it is worth the investment. Every Christian, every follower of Jesus is called to develop a generous heart and a generous spirit. So how can you begin to develop a culture of generosity in your local church? Well, I want to give you a very simple exercise that you can do to get you started. I want you to gather with your leadership team. Maybe it's your finance committee or your stewardship team or your church council, and just have a discussion around this question. Where do we see examples of generosity in the life of our congregation today? There may already be generous people doing generous things in your church. Pay attention to it. Who are the generous people in your church? And here's a hint. It's not always the people that have the most money. Some of the most generous people I've ever known in my life are also people who have significant financial limitations themselves. But who are the generous people in your church? What makes them generous? What motivates them? As you begin to identify people in your church, lift up their stories. Invite generous people in your church to share their testimony in church. Invite them to share in a worship service why they give, what motivates them to give, what drives their generosity. You see, the truth is that one of the ways that we learn virtues in our life is by following the example of others. And so if we can lift up the example of generous people in our churches, it can begin to give everybody an example to follow. And we can say, be like these people because they exhibit something of the quality of generosity. So I want to encourage you to do that. Begin to look for generous people in your church and lift up their stories. Now, in our next installment of this series, we're going to look at the ultimate example of generosity, and that is God's generosity toward us in Jesus Christ. Until that time, keep your eyes open for signs of generosity in your local church. We'll see you next time.